The truck came through the snow without headlights bright enough to matter, backed up to Ethan Walker's old warehouse and dumped 500 pounds of factory scrap into the white yard. Everyone in Marquette saw waste. Ethan saw webbing, leather, steel buckles, and one last chance to build something that might keep another man alive in a storm. Snow fell over Marquette, Michigan with the heavy patience of something that had no intention of stopping. By 7 that January morning, Lake Superior had disappeared behind a moving wall of white. The fence beside Ethan Walker's rented warehouse had become a soft ridge, and the plow berm at the road was taller than the hood of his truck. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink with a mug of coffee cooling in his hand and watched tire tracks appear where no tire tracks should have been. He was 38 years old, broad through the shoulders with close-cut brown hair. A narrow scar along the right side of his face and eyes that had learned to measure a room before trusting it. He had been in places where the dark made noise and the water tried to swallow men whole. He had been called brave by people who did not understand that bravery was often just a job done while your hands were shaking. Now he lived at the edge of town in a place that smelled of pine boards, diesel, old rope, and wet wool. He liked the quiet. Most days the quiet liked him back. Atlas did not like the tire tracks. The 6-year-old German shepherd lifted his sable head from the rug ears, sharpening black saddle dark against the winter light. His muzzle had a few silver hairs around it, the only visible softness in a dog built like a promise that knew how to bite. Atlas had once worked around explosives in crowded docks and men who spoke in hand signals. Retirement had not made him lazy. It had made him opinionated. He rose, padded to the door, and put his body between Ethan and the outside as if he paid the rent. "Move," Ethan said. Atlas did not move. "That is not a debate position," Ethan told him, reaching for his waxed canvas coat. Atlas sneezed, which in his language meant the debate had entered a new phase. By the time Ethan forced the door open against the drift, the truck had already turned into the yard. It was a flatbed with factory mud dried along the fenders and a canvas tarp snapped stiff by ice. The driver wore a knit cap pulled low and did not climb down at first. He backed toward the warehouse doors, stopped with a sharp hiss of brakes, and looked through the windshield at Ethan as if hoping the whole matter could be handled without conversation. Ethan walked through calf-deep snow. The cold found the gap between his glove and sleeve and bit cleanly. Atlas stayed at his left knee, silent now, his paws punching neat holes in the powder. The driver rolled the window down 3 inches. "You, Walker. Depends who is asking. Factory in Negaunee. Owen Pierce said your place had room. Room for what?" The driver looked past him toward the warehouse, then pulled a folded delivery slip from the dash. "Scrap." He did not wait for agreement. That was the part Ethan remembered later. The man did not ask where to put it, did not offer a rate, did not say whether anyone had called ahead. He climbed down, released the tarp straps with red hands, and tipped the bed. A sliding groan filled the yard. Then the load came down. It hit the snow with a dense, ugly thud. Black nylon webbing, rolls of gray ballistic fabric, stiff strips of leather, bundles of straps cut at odd lengths, steel buckles with scratches across the finish, plastic bins of rivets, snapped clips, label tags, and things Ethan could not name before the snow began naming them all white. 500 pounds of yesterday's mistake dropped beside the warehouse like a body nobody wanted to claim. "That it?" the driver asked. "No paperwork. Slip says disposal diversion." He held it out and shrugged. "I just drive. Who authorized this?" "Owen." "Owen, no, my uncle is dead." The driver blinked. For the first time he looked sorry. "I don't know what Owen knows." Ethan took the paper. The wind tried to steal it. He folded it once and put it in his coat pocket because men who survived bad weather learned not to let paper fly away until they knew whether it was evidence or trash. The driver climbed back into the cab, turned the truck in a wide, careless arc, and left 2 brown tracks that filled with snow almost immediately. Ethan stood there for a long moment. The yard went quiet except for the soft ticking of frozen exhaust fading into the morning. Somewhere beyond the white curtain, a gull cried over the harbor, lost and irritated. Atlas stepped forward and sniffed the pile. He worked slowly, nose moving over the leather, the nylon, the cold metal. Then he shoved his muzzle under a coil of black webbing and pulled. The strip came free with a sound like a belt being drawn from a loop. It was broad, tightly woven, and hardly worn at all. Ethan took it from the dog. The webbing was stiff with cold, but his fingers knew strength when they touched it. So did the old part of his mind, the part that still measured loads. Anchor points, knots, exits, angles, the weight of a man in wet gear, the terrible pull of water around a rescue line. He rubbed snow off the tag. The ink was smeared, but he could read enough. High tensile nylon, fire-resistant coating, rejected, color variance, color variance. Ethan almost laughed. It came out as one dry breath that smoked in front of his face. He looked at the pile again, not as a nuisance now, not quite as an insult, but as a question somebody had dumped at his feet because they were too hurried or too blind to ask it properly. Atlas sat beside the webbing and stared at him. "Do not look smug," Ethan said. Atlas looked smug. The warehouse had belonged to Ethan's Uncle Ray, who had fixed boats, snowblowers, dock cranes, and once, according to local legend, a church bell that had frozen in such a position that it rang every time the wind came from the north. Ray had taken odd material for odd reasons: rope, sheet, metal, cracked ladders, a retired ambulance stretcher, things other people wanted gone. And Ray believed might have one more use if a man waited long enough. Ethan had inherited the building, 3 filing cabinets full of receipts, a coffee maker that threatened people more than it brewed, and a town full of neighbors who remembered him as Ray's quiet nephew from Virginia Beach. He had not come to Marquette to start anything. He had come to stop. Stop waking at 3:17 every morning. Stop reaching for a rifle that was not beside the bed. Stop hearing Mason Cole's voice in the roar of any engine that strained under load. Stop being useful, maybe because usefulness had cost him too much. The snow kept falling. By noon, he had dragged the first third of the pile into the warehouse. By 3, his shoulders burned, and Atlas had made a nest out of rejected insulation foam, as if supervising industrial salvage was a management position. Ethan sorted without deciding to sort. Leather strips to the left. Webbing by width along the center table, buckles into coffee cans, fabric rolls against the wall. Anything frayed went into a bin near the door, anything with melted edges went into a different bin, anything that made his fingers pause went on the workbench under the lamp. The warehouse was cold enough that his breath hung between the rafters. Snow hissed against the windows. He turned on the old radio for weather, but the signal came and went, offering pieces of a storm warning, a hymn, a truck advertisement, then static. Atlas did not care. He found another length of webbing and pulled it from beneath a leather sheet, with such confidence that Ethan had to step over and inspect it. "You were a bomb dog," Ethan said, "not a purchasing department." Atlas wagged once. The piece was good, better than good. A rescue harness did not need perfect color. It needed a spine that would not snap when a man slid down an icy grade with another man's life attached to him. Ethan laid the webbing beside the first strip and felt something in his chest shift small and unwelcome. Interest. That was dangerous. Interest led to plans. Plans led to people. People led to grief, standing in the doorway with snow on its boots. He worked until darkness pressed against the windows. Then he found the coil that changed everything. It had been hidden under a roll of gray fabric near the bottom, wrapped in clear plastic, its tag still crisp. The webbing was black dense and marked with a load rating high enough to make his hands go still. Not scrap. not in any meaningful sense, rejected only because one side had a faint streak where the die had taken unevenly. Ethan set it on the bench. Atlas stopped chewing a piece of cardboard and lifted his head. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "I see it." Outside, a shape moved beyond the frosted glass of the warehouse door. Not the driver, too still, too close. Atlas rose without sound, hackles lifting along his back, and a low growl rolled through the room. Ethan reached for the heavy flashlight beside the vise and turned toward the door as snow tapped softly against the walls covering the yard. The tire tracks and whatever footprints had led someone to stand there watching him. Morning came to Marquette under a sky the color of dull tin, and the snow had piled high enough against the warehouse door that Ethan had to shoulder it open like a man entering a room that did not want him. The figure from the night before was gone, leaving only a shallow depression near the door and a set of boot prints partly erased by wind. Atlas studied those prints with more seriousness than some men gave their mortgages. He sniffed once, sneezed twice, then looked at Ethan with the plain judgment of a dog who believed humans should have solved this already. Ethan crouched and touched the edge of one track. Work boot, large, deep heel. Not the driver, unless the driver had come back hours later to stand in the dark like a fool. The prints crossed the yard from the road, stopped at the warehouse window, then turned back. Whoever it was had not tried to break in. They had wanted to look. That bothered Ethan more. He made coffee strong enough to qualify as a structural material and opened the delivery slip again. Nagoni Protective Systems, Disposal Diversion, Mixed Cut Waste, Contact Owen Pierce. Ethan read the name twice. He had met Owen once at Ray's funeral, a square man with polished boots and a handshake that arrived too early and squeezed too long. Owen had told a story about Ray taking broken pallets and turning them into shelving for the factory break room. He had smiled when he said it, but the smile had carried a small hook. Some men honored thrift. Some men mistook it for begging. Ethan took the first strips of webbing to the long table and laid out the old rescue harness he had kept in a duffel since Virginia Beach. It should have been thrown away years ago. The padding was salt-stained. One buckle had been replaced after a bad night off Cape Hatteras, and the stitching along the left hip had been hand-repaired in a barracks room. While Mason Cole told a story so funny, Ethan had stabbed his own thumb with the needle. Ethan could still hear the laugh that followed. He hated that. He loved it. Both things at once, like cold water and blood. Mason had been the kind of man who could make fear feel embarrassed for showing up. He had a crooked grin, a habit of humming old gospel songs before dangerous work, and a wife who sent cookies in tins that never survived more than one evening. In the final months before Ethan left the teams, Mason had started talking about moving north after retirement. Somewhere with trees, somewhere quiet. "You cannot hear a mortar round in heavy snow," he had said once, as if weather could be a mercy God kept in storage. Then came the rescue. Not a clean mission, they rarely were. A fishing vessel disabled in black water, civilian crew trapped wind hard enough to turn commands into fragments. Ethan remembered the deck rolling under his boots. He remembered Mason clipped to the line ahead of him. He remembered a wave climbing over the rail like a wall with teeth. After that memory broke into pieces, a glove tearing loose, a shout, Ethan's own hand closing on empty water. He did not speak Mason's name much. Atlas knew it anyway. The dog had come to Ethan months later, retired from service after a blast in a cargo yard left him wary of sudden metal sound. Two damaged workers, one with paws, one with a pension, both pretending retirement was a plan. Atlas had learned Ethan's nightmares before Ethan admitted he had them. He woke him with a cold nose under the wrist, not gently because Atlas believed subtlety was for cats and politicians, By late morning, Caleb Rhodes arrived in a red pickup older than several town council members and twice as loud. He parked crookedly because the snowbank had opinions, climbed down with a thermos under one arm, and limped toward the warehouse with the stubborn rhythm of a man whose knees had resigned but whose heart had not accepted the paperwork. "You got yourself a mountain of trouble," Caleb called. "It was delivered. Most trouble is..." Caleb had been a friend of Uncle Ray's and a volunteer firefighter before his body started filing complaints. He wore a wool cap with the Marquette Rescue emblem faded nearly white, and his face had the weather-carved look of men who had stood in too many storms and won only half the arguments. Atlas greeted him with one dignified sniff, then leaned against his leg hard enough to make him laugh. "Traitor," Ethan said. "Dog recognizes quality." Caleb said, handing over the thermos. "Coffee. My daughter made it so it is not illegal like yours." They stood over the sorted piles while snow whispered down the roof. Ethan expected Caleb to make the same face others had made when they saw the factory scrap, a face that said Ray's nephew had finally lost the thread. Instead, Caleb picked up a strip of webbing, pulled it between both hands, and narrowed his eyes. "This is not bad." "No." "Why'd they throw it out? Wrong color, irregular lengths, some cosmetic damage." Caleb snorted. "The snow does not care what color your rescue strap is. That was my thought." It had not been his only thought. Ethan had spent half the night sketching. Harnesses for rescue sleds, tool belts for linemen working in ice, drag straps for snowmobilers, shoulder rigs for volunteer search teams that could not afford premium equipment, but could not afford cheap failure either. He hated how quickly his hand had moved. He hated more that the drawings looked possible. Caleb saw the open notebook. Ray used to say a man only needs 3 things to start a business: a problem, a table, and someone too stubborn to quit. Ray never ran a business. No, but he ran out of money 6 different ways and still fed half the block when storms knocked power out. That counts for something. Ethan looked at the old harness. "I am not starting a business." "Good. Those are famous last words. Makes the paperwork feel surprised." The door opened before Ethan could answer. Grace Miller stepped inside carrying a cardboard box, against her hip cheeks pink from the cold, dark hair tucked under a gray hat. She owned Miller Hardware on Front Street, the sort of place where a person could buy bolts, furnace filters, snow shovels, local gossip, and advice they had not requested. Ray had kept an account there for 20 years. Ethan had inherited that too. "Delivery," she said. "Hinge screws, lamp chain, and the wool socks you ordered after pretending your boots were fine." "My boots are fine. Your boots are a cry for help." Caleb laughed into his thermos. Atlas left Caleb immediately and went to inspect Grace's box, because he believed all boxes belonged to him until proven otherwise. Grace set the supplies on the bench and took in the piles. "Ethan, please tell me this is not a new decorating style." "Factory scrap." "For what?" He should have shrugged. He should have said nothing. Instead, because the day was already cracked open, he lifted the first harness sketch and laid it beside the old rescue gear. "Winter rescue equipment, maybe tool belts, drag straps, things that need to hold under load in snow and cold." Grace studied the drawing. Her expression changed slowly from polite concern to something more dangerous interest, with a ledger behind it. "You can make that from this?" "Maybe." Maybe is doing a lot of work. Most useful words do. She touched the webbing, then the old harness, then glanced at Atlas as if the dog might provide a business reference. Atlas sat noble and completely unqualified. "People around here spend money on good winter gear," she said, "but they do not trust clever ideas fast. Neither do I." "That might help." Caleb moved toward the doorway, suddenly quiet. Outside, the wind had shifted. It drove snow sideways across the yard, hiding the road, the town, even the red shape of his truck. For a moment, all four of them listened to the warehouse creak. Ethan felt the old feeling climb his spine, the one that arrived before a mission, when the world narrowed to weather gear and the fragile fact of being alive. Caleb noticed. He always noticed more than he admitted. "There was a boy out by Big Bay years ago," he said, not looking at Ethan. "Bad storm. We had rope, but not enough good rope. Not enough men who trusted what we had. I have wondered about that rope for 20 years. Grace's face softened. Ethan did not ask the rest. Some stories stood in the room better when no one dragged them by the collar. That afternoon, he cut the first pattern from brown paper. He traced the old harness, changed the shoulder angle, widened the load-bearing strap, marked the stress points, and wrote numbers in the margin. Atlas lay under the table paws, twitching in a dream. Grace left near dusk, but not before saying she would clear a shelf at the hardware store if he ever made something he trusted. Caleb lingered in the doorway. "Ray would have liked this," he said. Ethan kept his eyes on the pattern. Ray liked broken things. "No," Caleb said. Ray liked things other people were too impatient to understand. After he left, Ethan worked until his back cramped. The first cut was crooked. The second was better. By midnight, the warehouse smelled of nylon dust, cold leather coffee, and the metal tang of effort. Ethan punched stitch holes with an awl from Ray's toolbox, each one clean through the webbing and leather pad. Outside, another truck groaned somewhere beyond the snow, or maybe it was only the plow grinding past on the county road. Atlas stood suddenly. His ears pointed toward the front windows. Ethan froze with the awl in his hand. On the sill, under the thin line of light, a folded piece of paper had been slipped through the crack where the old window did not close right. He crossed the room, opened it, and read the block letters written in black marker. "Factory trash stays trash." The storm stayed over Marquette for 3 days, thick enough to turn noon into a kind of pale evening, and the town moved by memory more than sight. Plows growled along invisible streets, porch lights burned all day, and Lake Superior hurled snow inland as if emptying a white ocean, one handful at a time. Ethan taped the note to the wall above the workbench. Not because he enjoyed being threatened. He did not. He taped it there because some men needed a target outside themselves, and because the words had done something the stranger likely had not intended. They had made the work feel less like curiosity and more like an answer. Factory trash stays trash. He read it every time his hand cramped. He read it when the needle stuck in the dense webbing and he had to pull it through with pliers. He read it when the first shoulder pad came out too stiff, when the second pulled unevenly, when the third sat against his own collarbone in a way that would bruise a man after 2 hours in a search line. He read it while Atlas watched him from beneath the table with the grave disappointment of a supervisor who could not understand why progress required so much muttering. "You are welcome to help," Ethan said. Atlas thumped his tail once. "That is not help." The dog thumped again, slower, as if billing hourly. The first working harness was finished just after midnight on the third day. It was not beautiful. One strap had a faint gray streak. The leather pad was cut from 2 pieces instead of one, joined by a saddle stitch Ethan had learned long before for repairing gear in places where replacement parts did not exist. The steel D-ring had scratches across it. The load path, though, was clean. Shoulder to spine, spine to waist, waist to anchor. No single point carried what the whole system should share. That mattered. Cheap gear often failed not because every part was weak, but because one small corner was asked to do the work of a beam. Ethan wrote that in his notebook, then stared at the sentence and heard Dr. Mason Cole's voice in memory, though Mason had never been a doctor of anything except surviving bad choices. That is true of people too, Walker, Mason would have said. Ask one corner of a man to carry all his grief and see how fast he tears. Ethan closed the notebook. In the morning, he rigged the first test. The warehouse rafters had been built by a previous generation that trusted lumber more than convenience. Thick beams blackened by time and stove smoke. Ethan bolted a temporary anchor plate into one hung a pulley and filled canvas sacks with sand and scrap metal until each weighed more than a man in winter gear. Atlas watched from what Ethan had named the blast radius, though in truth it was just the doorway. Stay. Atlas stayed. He hated it visibly. The first pull held, the second held. The third made a stitch creak in a way Ethan did not like. So he marked the point with chalk, cut the tension, and reinforced the seam. Then he did it again, and again. By noon, his shoulders were wet with sweat despite the cold. The harness had carried more weight than most volunteer rescue teams would ever put on it, and the webbing had not stretched beyond tolerance. He photographed everything: date, temperature, load, duration, failure points. No failure. He wrote that twice because the first time looked too hopeful. Grace arrived with soup in a mason jar and a paper bag of rolls. She knocked once, then came in before he answered, which he was beginning to understand. Was her entire philosophy of community care. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you, too. It is 1 in the afternoon. Then I look punctual." She set the food on the bench and looked at the harness hanging from the test rig. "Is that the thing?" "A thing. That means yes." Ethan did not answer. He tightened a strap and noted the abrasion near one buckle. Grace moved closer, careful not to touch anything without permission. There were people who handled another person's work like it was merchandise, and there were people who handled it like it might be a sleeping child. Grace was the second kind. "It looks strong," she said. "Looks are not data." "No, but sometimes they are an invitation." He gave her the notebook. She read quietly, lips moving once over the load numbers. Atlas rose and leaned against her knee, either offering support or checking for hidden rolls. Grace scratched behind his ear without looking away from the page. "This is more organized than most businesses I know," she said. "It is a test. Ethan, what tests are what people do when they are trying to trust something." He took the notebook back more quickly than needed. She did not comment. The soup steamed between them, smelling of chicken thyme and the kind of kindness that made him defensive. He ate standing up because sitting down felt too close to admitting he was tired. That afternoon, he called Negaunee Protective Systems. It took 3 transfers and one woman named Linda who sounded like she could run the state with a pencil and half a sandwich before Owen Pierce came on the line. "Walker," Owen said, "how is Ray's old place?" "Cold. That building was always cold. You sent a load of mixed-cut waste. We had you on the diversion list. Your uncle took materials from us. My uncle is dead." "Yes, sorry about that." A pause not long enough to be grief. "Do you want off the list?" Ethan looked at the harness. He looked at the note on the wall. He looked at Atlas, who had discovered the soup jar and was pretending he had not. "How often does this material come available?" Owen laughed once. "Why, I asked how often. Every 6 to 8 weeks, depending on contracts. But listen, none of that is production grade. It is scrap. Wrong color, odd cuts, rejects off lengths. Insurance would have a fit if we sold it as anything. I am not asking you to certify it." "Then what are you doing with it?" "Testing. Testing trash." There it was. Not the exact voice from the note, but close enough to sit at the same table. Ethan kept his tone flat. "Testing material? Owen sighed the way men sigh when they believe patience is a gift they are giving the world. Walker, if this is about making a few dog leashes or belts or whatever Ray used to fiddle with, that is fine. But do not get ideas. The market is full of winter gear. Real companies make it, with real liability coverage. Good to know. And do not use our name. We are diverting waste, not sponsoring a project. Understood. I mean it. So do I. He hung up before Owen could add another layer of caution and called the Marquette Volunteer Search and Rescue Office. A woman answered over the sound of a printer and someone coughing. Ethan gave his name, said he had a prototype rescue harness he wanted field feedback on, and endured a silence long enough to grow antlers. "You want to sell us something?" she asked. "No. I want you to try to break it." That got him invited to a meeting. The community center stood 2 blocks from the harbor, low and brick, with snow piled over the shrubs like sleeping animals under blankets. Ethan arrived the next evening carrying the harness in a canvas duffel. Atlas was not allowed inside, which Atlas considered an error in policy and expressed by fogging the truck window with tragic breath. Ethan promised him half a roll if they survived the meeting. Inside, 12 volunteers sat in folding chairs. Some were young and restless. Some were older and moved like every bone knew the weather report. Caleb sat in the back, wool cap in his lap, not looking at Ethan directly, but not looking away either. Grace stood near the coffee urn, having appeared through channels known only to hardware store owners and angels with clipboards. Ethan laid the harness on the table. He had faced commanders, foreign officials, grieving families, and once a goat in a village alley that had more tactical confidence than any officer he had met. Still, his throat tightened. People were harder than storms. Storms did not expect you to explain yourself. "This is made from factory-rejected webbing and leather," he began. "Not degraded material, rejected for cosmetic and dimensional reasons. I have load-tested the first prototype under cold conditions, but I need practical feedback from people who actually drag sleds through local terrain." A man in the second row leaned forward. "You made that in Ray Walker's old warehouse?" "Yes." Someone else said, "From scrap, from inspected scrap." The distinction landed poorly. A few faces closed. Ethan showed the test photos, the load paths, the reinforced seams. He spoke for 7 minutes, maybe 8. He did not sell. Selling required a shine he did not possess. He gave them numbers, temperature, weight, stitch density, abrasion points. Grace watched him with an expression he could not read. Then Blake Harris laughed. Blake owned North Ridge Outfitters, the polished outdoor shop near the tourist hotels, and he had the confident posture of a man used to telling other people what quality looked like. He lifted the harness by one strap and turned it under the fluorescent lights. "Look, I respect the effort," he said in a tone that did not. "But folks around here are not trusting their lives to gear stitched together from factory garbage in a boat shed." The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. Worse, considering quiet. Ethan felt heat climb his neck. His hands stayed still on the table. Mason would have smiled. Ray would have said something with nails in it. Ethan did neither. "How often does your budget replace drag straps?" he asked. Blake blinked. "What? The imported ones, how often do they fail?" "They do not fail, they wear out." "How often?" A woman in a rescue jacket answered from the back. "Every season if we use them hard." Ethan nodded. "And mine has held above your field load after freeze soak and abrasion. If it fails, I want to know where. If it holds you, save money and carry better gear." Blake smiled with that particular kindness people use when they have already decided you are small. "That is a nice hobby, Walker." The old words had new clothes, but Ethan recognized the body inside them. Caleb shifted in his chair. "Blake." "No offense," Blake said. Offense, Ethan had learned, was often what followed those 2 words carrying a suitcase. He packed the harness slowly. Grace stepped forward and touched the table. I will keep one at the hardware store if Ethan agrees. People can look. They can ask questions. The road to Harlow Lake vanished under the storm. Before the rescue convoy reached the first turnoff, snow drove across the headlights in hard white sheets, the kind that made distance meaningless and turned every tree into a sudden dark witness. Ethan rode in Caleb's truck with Atlas braced in the back seat, the prototype harness lying between Ethan's boots, like a question that had grown teeth. The radio spat fragments. 2 snowmobilers, last ping near the old logging cut. 1 possible injury, temperature falling, wind increasing after midnight. Volunteers checked in from trucks ahead, and behind them voices clipped, practical, afraid in the disciplined way of people who knew fear had a job but not command. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel. His jaw was tight. "You know that area?" Ethan asked. "Used to." Caleb adjusted the defroster, though it was already screaming. "Ridge drops off sharper than the map admits. In weather like this, a man can miss the trail by 10 feet and enter a different world." Atlas whined once low in his throat. Ethan reached back and touched 2 fingers to the dog's chest. Fast heartbeat. Alert, not panicked. Good. "You okay back there?" Atlas sneezed against the window. "I'll take that as command enthusiasm." Caleb gave a short laugh. It did not last. "We had a boy out there 22 winters ago. Different ridge, same kind of storm. By the time we found him, the rope we brought had iced so bad it would not feed through the hardware. I still hear his mother when the wind comes from the north." Ethan said nothing. Not because he had no answer, but because some confessions were not asking for one. The truck crawled forward, pine branches whipped across the windshield. Snow packed into the wipers and made them thud like a tired heart. At the staging point, volunteers moved under portable lights that shook in the wind. Sleds came off trailers. Radios were checked. Headlamps cut nervous tunnels through the white. Blake Harris stood beside a rescue sled in a bright shell jacket, his face half hidden by a scarf, giving instructions with more volume than confidence. When he saw Ethan step out with the duffel, his eyes narrowed. "We are not testing homemade equipment in the middle of a rescue," Blake said. "Then do not," Ethan answered. Grace was not there, but Ethan could almost hear her saying that was not his warmest customer service voice. The team leader, a compact woman named Dana Whitcomb with silver hair under her helmet and a whistle clipped to her zipper, turned from the map table. "Walker, you brought the harness." "Yes." "Load rated, tested above field load, not certified." "Everything we own is half frozen and 2 straps short," she said. "If I need it, I will decide." That ended the discussion. Blake did not like it, but the storm did not care what Blake liked. They moved into the trees in 2 teams. Ethan went with Caleb, Dana and 2 younger volunteers pulling a rescue sled. Atlas led on a long line, nose down, tail level, his body becoming all-purpose. He crossed the trail, doubled back, then pushed into a gap between spruce trunks where no snowmobile should have gone. Ethan felt the line tighten through his glove. "He has something." Blake's voice crackled over the radio from the other team. "Trail runs east. They would not cut there." Donna looked at Atlas, then at the dark gap. "Dogs do not care about would not. Move." The woods swallowed them. Snow fell thicker under the branches, soft and treacherous. Ethan's breath froze along the edge of his scarf. Once his boot broke through a crust and plunged knee-deep into hidden brush. Caleb hauled him free with a grunt and said, "Welcome to the North," as if the North had personally invited Ethan to make poor choices. Atlas pulled harder. The line led downhill. Ethan saw the broken branch first, then the scrape where a snowmobile had left the trail, then the faint red flicker of a taillight half buried in snow. "Contact," he called. They found the first rider 20 yards below the ridge, conscious. Shivering, one arm wrapped around a spruce trunk. The second was lower, pinned beneath the edge of his machine where it had tipped into a hollow. Snow had drifted over him to the chest. He was breathing, but his voice came thin and confused. The slope was ugly. Not a cliff, not dramatic enough for a movie, but steep with loose snow over rock and ice, the sort of place where a rescuer could become another patient with one bad step. Donna studied the angle and the old straps on the sled. One had already begun to fray near the buckle. "We need a controlled haul," she said. Blake arrived breathing hard with the second team. He saw the pinned rider and stopped arguing with the weather long enough to look afraid. "Use the main strap." "Main strap is compromised," Dana said. "It will hold." Ethan had heard those words in too many accents. "It will hold." The prayer of men asking cheap things to behave like good ones. He opened the duffel. Blake's head snapped toward him. "Dana!" "Quiet," she said. Ethan fitted the prototype harness over his own shoulders first. Cold webbing, stiff leather buckles biting through gloves. The thing settled against him better than he expected, the load path snug across his back. He clipped the rescue line through the reinforced D-ring and handed Dana the secondary strap. "Anchor me high. Sled below. I go down, clear the machine, you haul on my mark." "You are not on the roster," Blake said. "Neither is the storm." Dinah looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Ethan, and in that glance, Ethan saw the old man's 22-year burden step into the snow beside them. "He knows load work," Caleb said. "Go," Dana ordered. Ethan descended on his heels, and one gloved hand Atlas whining above him because he had been commanded to stay. The line tightened across Ethan's back. The harness took the pull, spread it through his shoulders and waist, and held. Good. One step, then another. The pinned rider blinked up at him through ice-crusted lashes. "Hey," Ethan said. "I am Ethan. Dog found you. Try not to disappoint him." The man made a sound that might have been a laugh if he had more heat left. Ethan dug snow away from the rider's chest, checked the machine's pressure point, and threaded a drag loop under the man's arms. The old gear would have rubbed high against the ribs. Ethan's strap lay flat. He saw it, noted it, stored the improvement for later because the part of him that built things did not stop even when the part of him that feared loss was shouting. "Ready," he called. The haul began. The harness bit into him, then settled. No tearing, no slipped buckle, no sudden hot snap of failure. Ethan braced and guided the rider up the slope, inch by inch. His legs shook, not from cold, snow packed inside his collar. Caleb's voice came from above, steady and raw. "Pull! Hold! Pull!" The rider cleared the hollow. Then the frayed old strap on the rescue sled snapped. For half a second, everything went loose and wrong. The sled slid sideways. A volunteer shouted. Blake lunged and missed. Ethan threw his weight downhill, clipped the prototype's secondary line through the sled rail, and took the shock through his body. The harness seized the load like a fist closing. Pain flashed across his ribs. He dug both boots into snow and ice. "Anchor!" he shouted. Atlas broke command. He launched down the first yards of slope before Dana caught the long line, not stopping him exactly, only redirecting his fury into usefulness. The dog braced low muscles standing under his coat, and the extra tension held the sled just long enough for Caleb and Dana to reset the anchor. Nobody spoke for a breath. Then Dana said, "Haul." They brought the second rider up alive. At the staging area, portable heaters roared and medics wrapped the men in silver blankets. One volunteer clapped Ethan on the shoulder and nearly knocked him into the coffee table. Another asked where he had bought the harness. Blake stood near the map board, staring at the broken factory-made strap in his hand. Ethan unclipped from the prototype slowly. The webbing had a white abrasion mark near the hip. The stitching held. He photographed it with fingers that did not quite work. Caleb came beside him. Snow had frozen in his eyebrows. He looked older than he had an hour before and lighter. "Rope held," he said. "Yes, this time." Ethan did not trust himself to answer. Atlas pressed against his leg, wet, filthy, magnificent, and very pleased with his unauthorized decision-making. Ethan put a hand on the dog's head. "We will discuss obedience later." Atlas leaned harder. By morning, the video had spread through Marquette. A volunteer had filmed the haul by accident while trying to use her headlamp camera, and the short clip showed enough. Snow screaming through the beams, the sled sliding, Ethan taking the load, the homemade harness holding when the store-bought strap failed. Grace called before 8. "You are famous," she said. "No, Marquette famous. It is smaller and comes with more casserole." Owen Pierce called at 9. His voice was tight. "I heard you used our scrap in a rescue. I used inspected material. Do not attach our factory name to this." "I did not." "Good, because if someone gets hurt, I do not want that coming back to us." Ethan looked across the warehouse at the pile of material. Atlas was there, nosing under a leather sheet, stubbornly searching. He pulled out a stiff panel and dragged it into the light. Ethan frowned. A stamped lot code marked the underside, clean and official, the same code used on production-grade goods. He picked it up, then another, then another. The factory had not been dumping only flawed material. Some of it had passed inspection. Some of it was better than anything sitting on Blake's shelves. Outside, fresh snow covered the yard again, soft as forgiveness and just as difficult to trust. Ethan held the stamped panel in one hand, and Owen's silence hummed through the phone in the other. "Walker," Owen said. Ethan looked at Atlas, then at the note on the wall. "We need to talk about what you are throwing away." The next week opened under a cold blue sky, which in Marquette meant the storm had not ended so much as stepped outside to catch its breath. Snow sat on every roof in heavy layers, and the harbor cranes wore white caps like old men pretending not to be cold. Ethan cleared a path from the warehouse door to the scrap pile with a shovel whose handle had been repaired 3 times by Uncle Ray, and once badly by Ethan. The rescue had left him sore in places he had forgotten could complain. The bruise across his ribs bloomed purple and yellow where the harness had taken the sled's shock. He pressed 2 fingers against it in the mirror that morning and decided pain was acceptable data. Atlas disagreed. He followed Ethan with the offended precision of a nurse who had not been consulted. Whenever Ethan bent too fast, the dog nudged his thigh. Whenever Ethan lifted too much, Atlas stood on the material. This was not helpful. It was, however, difficult to argue with 80 pounds of German Shepherd who believed safety standards began with him. "Get off the webbing," Ethan said. Atlas looked away, a clear admission of guilt without remorse. The stamped leather panels sat in a neat row on the bench. Ethan had spent hours tracing lot codes, comparing the marks to tags still attached to webbing rolls and calling numbers printed on old shipping labels. The pattern was plain. Neganí Protective Systems had dumped mixed scrap that included cosmetic rejects, off-length pieces, and a surprising quantity of production-grade leftovers from discontinued contracts. Not enough to run a conventional factory line, more than enough for a careful small shop. Careful, that was the word. He did not trust excitement. Excitement skipped steps. Excitement rounded numbers up. Excitement got men killed when it dressed itself as confidence. So Ethan built a testing station. The first version was ugly enough to make Ray proud. He mounted a hand winch to a steel post, bolted an anchor plate into the concrete floor, hung a dial scale from a salvaged tow hook, and used an old snowmobile frame as a weighted sled. He cut test strips from each material lot and labeled them in block letters: width, thickness, Surface condition, temperature, wet test, freeze test, abrasion test, flex count. If a strap failed, he wanted to know exactly where and why. If it held, he wanted to know that too without poetry getting in the way. Grace came by at noon with 3 customers. She did not ask permission. Ethan was learning that Grace considered permission a useful concept for strangers' locked doors and baked goods belonging to children. For anything else, she arrived with purpose. "These are the gentlemen I told you about," she said, stomping snow from her boots. "Ben runs electrical crews on commercial jobs. Howard plows private roads. Mike volunteers with the county rescue team and has opinions about everything with a buckle." "That is slander," Mike said. "It is your entire personality," Grace replied. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. He hated unexpected people in the warehouse. People changed the air. They made him aware of the scar on his face, the roughness of his voice, the way he stood with his back never fully to a door. Atlas moved between the visitors and the workbench, not aggressive, only present like a furry legal notice. The men wanted to see the harness from the rescue video. Ethan showed them the actual prototype abrasion mark and all. Ben picked up a tool belt sample Ethan had made from a broad leather piece and webbing backing. It had 2 pouches, a hammer loop, reinforced corners, and a wide pad designed not to stiffen in cold. "How much?" Ben asked. "It is not for sale." Grace made a small sound that might have been a cough and might have been the word coward wearing a coat. Ben looked disappointed. "Why not? It has not been field tested. I can field test a belt. I am not selling untested gear." "Then let me buy it after I test it." Ethan paused. That was different. A man willing to put his work where his mouth was had value. A man willing to pay after proof had even more. 2 weeks, Ethan said. "Daily use. You tell me where it rubs, stretches, or annoys you. If it fails, you bring it back. If it does not, you can buy the next version." Ben smiled. "You always make buying things this hard. Only things I care about." Howard took 2 drag straps for his plow truck under the same arrangement. Mike borrowed the rescue harness for controlled drills. Grace watched all of it with a face too calm to be innocent. When the men left, she put a folded sheet of paper on Ethan's bench. "What is that?" "A shelf plan." "For what?" "For my store." "Grace, do not use my name in that tone. It makes you sound like a man about to say something foolish. Carefully." He looked at the paper. She had drawn a simple display for Miller hardware. 3 hooks for straps, a shelf for belts, a small sign reading Superior Rescue Works. Beneath it, she had written "Tested in Marquette snow." "I did not name anything," Ethan said. "I did." "You cannot name my maybe business." "Then make it a real one and change the sign." The name sat there. Superior Rescue Works. $2,000 for a warehouse with a coffee maker that threatened lawsuits. Too clean for scrap piles and chalk marks. But it carried the lake, the work, and the purpose. Ethan hated that he liked it. That evening he called Owen again. Owen answered on the 4th ring with irritation already warmed up. "If this is about the lot codes I checked," Owen said, "some discontinued contract material may have been included. It is still waste under our process. I want right of first refusal on material above minimum strength and thickness." There was silence. Then Owen laughed, not loudly, but with the soft disbelief of a man watching a dog file taxes. "You want a contract for scrap?" "Yes." "Walker, you have 1 prototype and local gossip. I have field use test data and documented savings on your disposal fees. Ray took whatever we brought and thanked us. Ray is not running this." That cooled the line. Owen said, "Send me your data. I will look at it." "No, I will bring it." "You think walking in here with charts changes what this is? It changes what you can pretend not to know." He heard Owen breathe through his nose. "Thursday, 10. Ethan hung up and looked at Atlas. That was diplomatic. Atlas yawned. Thursday came with sleet, which was snow after it had lost its manners. Ethan drove to Negaunee with a binder on the passenger seat and Atlas in the back because leaving him behind after recent events would have started a labor dispute. The factory sat low and broad behind chain-link fence, steam rising from roof vents. Inside, the air smelled of rubber oil, fabric dust, and warm metal. Owen Pierce met him in a small conference room with gray carpet and motivational posters about efficiency. He was in his 50s, thick through the chest, clean-shaven, with the polished confidence of someone who had spent years making smaller numbers behave for larger ones. He glanced at the binder as if it had tracked mud in. Ethan did not perform. He laid out the disposal costs Owen's driver had mentioned on old slips, the estimated weight of reusable materials. The field rescue report, the photos from the load tests, and a projected use schedule. He showed how much the factory saved by not hauling certain materials to the landfill. He showed how a simple, sorted delivery protocol would make his inspection faster and reduce their mixed waste handling. Owen listened longer than Ethan expected. "You were a SEAL," Owen said finally. "Yes. This seems a long way from that." "No." Owen waited. "It is gear, weather, load, failure points. People who do not get second chances if something breaks. Same language, different alphabet." For the first time, Owen looked at the photos instead of through them. He tapped one image of the Harlow Lake Hall. "You understand there is liability. I understand there is responsibility. Liability is what people talk about when they want responsibility to sound like paperwork." Owen almost smiled, then decided against it. "I can give you a letter, temporary, 90 days. You receive mixed offcuts before outside recycling bids. No warranty from us, no use of our name. You pick up if we request it. 6 months, 90 days. So right of first refusal on webbing over 2 inches wide, leather over 8 ounces, and metal hardware not structurally damaged." Owen leaned back. "You came prepared. So did the snow." The temporary letter was not everything Ethan wanted. It was enough. He signed it in the parking lot on the hood of his truck, while Atlas watched Owen through the rear window, with the solemn distrust of a church usher guarding the offering plate. When Ethan returned to the warehouse, a woman stood near the door with a little boy in a blue snowsuit beside her. She held a folder to her chest and looked ready to leave the moment she was told no. Grace's handwriting was on a sticky note attached to the folder. "Talk to her before you act like a locked toolbox." The woman's name was Natalie Brooks. She had worked logistics at a seasonal warehouse until the contract moved south. She had a sharp face, tired eyes, and the posture of someone who had carried more than groceries alone. Her son, Liam, stared at Atlas with open worship. Atlas stared back, then walked over and placed his chin gently on the boy's mitten. "Traitor," Ethan whispered for the second time that month. Natalie opened the folder. Inventory spreadsheets, shipping schedules, vendor lists, a simple proposal for organizing the warehouse into receiving, grading, cutting, sewing, inspection, and packing zones. She had seen the article Grace had pushed to a local community page, then called Grace Then Come, before courage could cool. "I do not know leather work," Natalie said, "but I know how to keep orders from disappearing into a corner. I know how to label material so nobody spends 20 minutes looking for what is under their foot. I know how to make a small operation look less small when a customer asks whether you can deliver." Ethan glanced around the warehouse. A strap lay across a chair. Buckles sat in coffee cans. His notebook was under a roll of webbing because he had put it somewhere and then defeated himself. "I am not sure there is a job yet," he said. Natalie nodded quickly, already folding hope into a shape small enough to carry home. "I understand." Atlas sat on her boot. She looked down. Ethan looked down. The dog did not move. "He does that when he has an opinion," Ethan said. What is his opinion? Apparently that I am an idiot. For the first time, Natalie smiled. Small, tired reel. Ethan looked at the binder from Nagani, the shelf plan from Grace, the loaned samples, the test rig, the note on the wall. Factory trash stays trash. He thought of Mason humming in bad weather. He thought of Caleb saying rope held this time. 3 days a week, he said. Temporary. You organize what I have, not what I pretend I have. If the work grows, we talk. Natalie nodded. Atlas lifted his head from her boot as if the contract had been executed. That night after she left, February came in hard and bright with mornings so cold the snow squeaked under boots and every breath felt sharpened before it entered the lungs. In the warehouse, Superior Rescue Works became real by accident first, then by habit, and then by the small terrifying pressure of people expecting it to be there tomorrow. Natalie began with labels. Ethan had underestimated labels. He had survived operations involving tide charts, encrypted radios, foreign coastlines, and men with rifles, but he had been defeated repeatedly by not knowing whether a bin contained 2-inch black webbing, 2.5-inch black webbing, or a dark mood in strap form. Natalie fixed this with marker boards, colored tags, and a clipboard system she guarded like scripture. If it enters the building, it gets a tag, she said. Even Atlas already has better tracking habits than you. The dog, who had dragged 3 usable straps into the inspection area that morning and deposited 1 sock of unknown origin beside Natalie's desk, accepted the praise with dignity. Ethan trained Natalie on grading material. He expected it to go slowly. It did not. She asked plain questions that cut through his habit of carrying whole explanations in his head. Why did that edge fray matter, but this scuff did not? Why could a cosmetic dye streak pass on a drag strap but not on a public-facing belt? Why was saddle stitching better in stress zones than machine stitching? When production speed mattered, each answer forced him to turn instinct into process. That was uncomfortable. It was also necessary. They built a wall chart together. Material grade A for load-bearing rescue pieces. Grade B for tool belts and utility straps. Grade C for pouches, liners, and non-critical components. Reject for anything melted, deeply cut, chemically stained, or unknown. The chart was not elegant. Natalie insisted on large lettering after watching Ethan squint and deny it. Grace brought a bulletin board from the hardware store and pretended it had been lying around. Caleb installed it crooked, then argued the wall was at fault. Orders came in slowly, then less slowly. Ben, the electrical contractor, returned after 10 days instead of 14 and put the tool belt on the workbench like a man laying down evidence. "I owe you money," he said. "It failed. No, that is why I owe you money." The belt was stained with salt and sawdust. 1 pouch had softened where his pliers rubbed. The stitching held. The back pad did not crack in cold. Ben had written notes on yellow paper, some useful, some alarming. Needs pencil slot. Hammer loop good. Belt does not bite when bending. Apprentice tried to steal it. Apprentice has poor judgment but good taste. Howard bought 4 drag straps after one pulled his plow truck out of a ditch at 2 in the morning. Mike from Rescue recommended the harness for training with modifications. Dana Whitcomb requested 2 improved versions for non-emergency drills. Grace placed the first Superior Rescue Works display in Miller Hardware beside snow shovel handles and ice cleats. She called it a soft launch. Ethan called it a shelf. Natalie called it revenue. Atlas called it irrelevant because none of the straps were edible. By the end of February, Ethan had sold 7 tool belts, 11 drag straps, and 3 harness prototypes marked field trial. That did not sound like much until Natalie put the numbers on paper. Material cost per belt was mostly hardware thread, abrasives, packaging, and the electricity that kept the warehouse lights from giving up. The webbing and leather were free under the temporary agreement. Labor was the mountain. Time was the weather system. Demand was no longer a rumor. "You cannot sew every piece yourself," Natalie said one afternoon. "I can for now. For now is not a plan. It is a delay wearing boots." Ethan looked at her. "Did Grace teach you that?" "Grace teaches by exposure." He wanted to object. He did not. His hands ached each night. The scar along his face felt tight when he stayed too long under the lamp. More than once he woke at the workbench with Atlas's nose under his elbow and the radio muttering hymns into the rafters. Caleb became their unofficial field tester. He refused any title because, in his words, titles were how people tricked you into meetings. He took straps to snowmobile clubs, volunteer crews, plow drivers, and one stubborn ice fisherman who claimed he could break anything built by man. The ice fisherman returned 3 days later and bought 2 more. "Said they were ugly," Caleb reported. "They are straps," Ethan said. Then he said ugly was good because nobody steals ugly. "Tell him I am moved by his endorsement." Caleb grinned, then grew serious. "You should come to training Thursday. I have work. You always have work. That is what work means. No, that is what hiding means when a man gives it a useful name." Ethan's jaw tightened. Caleb did not flinch. The old man had fought enough fires to know smoke when he smelled it. The training took place on a frozen slope behind the county maintenance yard. Snow fell lightly, more decorative than hostile, and the volunteers practiced hauling weighted sleds around trees. Ethan watched from the edge with Atlas arms crossed, giving feedback when asked and swallowing comments when not. Blake Harris stood on the far side with arms crossed in a way that suggested he believed he had invented the posture. He said little. That was progress. One of Ethan's revised harnesses took a diagonal load during a simulated slip and twisted uncomfortably across the volunteer's ribs. Not dangerous. Not good. Ethan saw it before anyone complained. He marked the adjustment, thanked the volunteer, and went quiet. Dana stepped beside him. "You look like someone shot your truck. The load path is wrong on side pull. Then fix it." "I should have caught it." "You caught it before a rescue, that is why we train. It was simple, it should have helped. It did a little." On the drive back, Atlas slept with his head against the rear door. Ethan passed the harbor and saw lights glowing in windows along Front Street. People eating dinner. People arguing gently about bills, television, children, weather. People living in the ordinary country he had protected from far away and never quite learned how to enter again. He pulled up outside Miller Hardware instead of going straight to the warehouse. Grace was closing. She unlocked the door when she saw him turn the sign back to open for no one in particular and let Atlas nose his way in first. The display shelf stood near the counter. 2 straps were missing. A belt was gone too. "Sold?" Ethan asked. "No, I hid them for dramatic effect." "Grace?" "Yes, sold." She pulled receipts from the register. "And Mrs. Holloway wants a smaller utility belt for gardening once the snow remembers it is not king forever." Gardening. People use tools in places other than heroic blizzards. He looked at the shelf at the small card Grace had made explaining that the materials were reclaimed from regional industrial waste and tested in cold conditions. There was no pity in the display, no veteran sob story, no charity language, just function, durability, and place. "Thank you," he said. Grace softened. "You are welcome." Atlas chose that moment to steal a wool glove from a low bin and parade it past the register. "He is not welcome," Grace added. In March, Owen sent the second load. This time it came sorted in rough categories which told Ethan 2 things. Owen had listened, and Owen would deny listening if asked. The driver handed over a manifest with weights and material types. No apology, no explanation. Ethan preferred that. Apologies cost more than manifests and were less useful. Natalie looked at the load and whistled. This is enough for 2 months. If orders hold. Orders will not hold, she said. They will grow. He heard warning in her voice, not excitement. They both looked at the warehouse. It was already tight. Material racks lined one wall. The cutting table had eaten the open floor. Shipping boxes sat too close to the old stove. Atlas's bed had been relocated twice, a violation he had documented with long sighs. We need more space, Natalie said. No. That was fast. We use what we have. We are using what we have. That is how we know it is not enough. He did not answer. The idea of expansion made his ribs feel tight in a way no harness could explain. Expansion meant committing. Committing meant others depending on him. Others depending on him meant a new kind of failure waiting outside with its collar turned up. That night, Ethan stayed after Natalie left and drew a possible layout for the unused storage shed attached to the back of the warehouse. It had a sagging roof, cracked windows, and a colony of drafts with ancestral claims. But it had square footage. Ray had used it for snowblower parts and things labeled maybe. Ethan measured twice, noted repairs, calculated cost, and wrote at the top of the page, not yet. The next morning, Grace found the paper because Grace found everything. Not yet is not no, she said. You are in my warehouse too often. I have a key. Why do you have a key? Ray gave me one in 2014. That does not answer the question. It answers more than you think. The first article appeared in a local online newsletter after the Harlow rescue volunteer posted more details. The headline called Ethan a former Navy SEAL turning factory waste into winter life-saving gear. Ethan disliked the headline because it made him sound tidier than he was. The article brought 12 online orders, 2 calls from rescue teams in the Upper Peninsula, and 1 voicemail from Blake Harris asking to discuss a retail possibility when Ethan had time. Natalie listened to the voicemail twice, then looked at Ethan over the phone. Do not make that face. What face? The face of a man who would rather fight weather than set wholesale terms. Ethan looked at Atlas. Do I have a wholesale terms face? Atlas rolled onto his back and exposed his belly, refusing involvement. Before Ethan could call Blake back, the sky darkened. By late afternoon, snow began again, wet and heavy this time. The kind that came down like torn cloth and stuck to every branch. The radio warned of roof loads, power outages, and hazardous travel. Caleb called and told Ethan to shovel the storage shed roof before morning. It has held this long, Ethan said. That is what roofs say right before they become floors. Ethan promised he would do it after dinner. The storage shed fell inward in a slow, brutal sigh, and then all at once. Snow, shingles, rafters, old boards, and years of Uncle Ray's maybe pile crashed into the dark space behind the warehouse, sending a white breath of dust and cold through the connecting doorway. Ethan moved before thought finished forming. He grabbed Natalie by the arm and pulled her back from the doorway as a final section of crossbeam dropped where she had been standing. Atlas barked once, sharp enough to cut through the roar, then plunged toward the open gap. Atlas, stay! Ethan shouted. The dog did not stay. He bounded over broken boards, nose down, searching. For 1 second, Ethan thought someone might have been inside. Not likely, impossible almost, but impossible had never been a guarantee. He followed with the flashlight, boots slipping on snow-covered debris, heart hammering too fast. Liam is at my sister's, Natalie said behind him, breathless, already understanding the fear without being told. No one should be back there. Should. Another word that looked sturdy until weight touched it. Atlas clawed at a drift near the far wall. Ethan dropped to his knees and dug with gloved hands. He found a cardboard box, then a tarp, then a metal tool case with Ray's name written across it in faded black marker. No person, no blood, no hand under snow. He sat back on his heels and let the cold enter his pants without caring. Natalie leaned against the doorframe, face pale. "How bad?" Ethan looked up. The shed roof was gone across half the span. Snow continued to fall into the ruins, soft and indifferent. Several sorted material bins had been stored along the interior wall after the last delivery. 2 were crushed. A rack of leather panels was soaked. A box of buckles had spilled into the snow like dull coins. "Bad," he said. The power flickered. The printer died with a tiny offended beep. Of all the things to break, that ridiculous beep almost made Natalie laugh. Almost. Instead, she put both hands on top of her head and stared at the open roof. "The Duluth inquiry is waiting. Blake wants pricing. Dana needs those harness revisions. We have 12 orders due Friday. We refund them." She turned toward him. "No, Natalie. No, you do not get to decide alone in the first 30 seconds of panic." He stood. "The material is compromised. The building is unsafe. I will not ship questionable work. I am not asking you to ship questionable work. I am asking you not to throw the whole company into the snow. Because the roof did what Caleb said roofs do. That was unfair, also accurate." Ethan hated when accuracy arrived wearing unfairness. He called Caleb, then Grace, then Dana, because if the structure was unsafe, someone in town would know who could brace it. By the time the first headlights appeared in the yard, Ethan had tarped the open doorway and moved the dry material away from the collapse. Atlas found the spilled buckles one by one and carried them to the packing table, which would have been more impressive if he had not also tried to keep 2 for personal reasons. Caleb arrived with 2 men from the volunteer department and a truck full of shoring lumber. Grace arrived with hot coffee, work gloves, and the expression of a woman prepared to make weather apologize. Pastor Daniel Reed came 10 minutes later in a parka and boots, carrying a thermos of chili and a stack of wool blankets from the church basement. "I did not call you," Ethan said. "Grace did," Pastor Daniel answered. "Of course she did. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Grace works by phone tree." Grace pointed at Ethan without slowing down. "Drink coffee or become useful. Choose one." People filled the warehouse. That was the hardest part, not the roof, not the lost material, the people. They moved around his tables, touched his bins, asked where straps went. Carried boxes, laughed too loudly, stepped into the private machinery of his work, and made it communal without asking permission from the part of him that still believed solitude was safety. Ethan wanted to command them into order. Natalie did it first better. Grade A webbing to the blue table. Wet leather goes flat on towels, do not stack it. Hardware gets dried before sorting. Nobody touches finished orders without gloves. Caleb, can your guys brace that corner before the next roof section shifts? Caleb looked delighted. "Yes, ma'am." Ethan stared at her. "What?" Natalie said. "You hired logistics. Temporary. That roof just made me permanent." He almost smiled. Then a beam shifted in the back and the smile left. They worked until midnight. Snow kept falling through the broken roof, but the volunteers built a temporary brace and covered the opening with tarps weighted by sandbags. Grace set up a drying station near the stove. Pastor Daniel made everyone eat chili out of paper bowls. A young volunteer named Sophie found the box of buckles Atlas had been helping with and declared the dog assistant manager of recovery operations. Atlas accepted the promotion and stole a napkin. Near 1 in the morning, Caleb and Ethan stood inside the ruined shed under a blue tarp snapping in the wind. The old man held the flashlight while Ethan checked the remaining rafters. "I should have shoveled it," Ethan said. "Yes." He looked at Caleb. "What you want, comfort or truth?" Could use both. Fine. You should have shoveled it and it did not kill anyone. That is mercy wearing work boots. Take it. Ethan ran a hand over a cracked beam. The wood was wet and splintered. I keep thinking if I control every piece, nothing breaks. Caleb's face changed. The flashlight beam trembled slightly. That thinking almost buried me. Ethan waited. The boy I told you about, Caleb said. 22 winters ago. We had a bad storm and bad rope and men tired enough to make fear sound practical. I was officer on scene. I delayed pushing the team into the ridge because I wanted better conditions, wanted better gear, wanted certainty. He swallowed. By the time we moved, we were too late. Snow hissed against the tarp. Somewhere in the warehouse, Grace laughed at something Pastor Daniel said, and the sound felt impossibly normal. You think you failed because you waited, Ethan said. I know I failed because I let perfect conditions become an excuse for not acting. Since then, I have tried to help without being the man in charge. Safer that way, less room to ruin a life. Ethan looked at him and saw not the old firefighter who joked about bad coffee, but a man carrying one winter like a stone under his coat. He knew that shape. His own stone had Mason's name on it. Mason died clipped to my line, Ethan said. Caleb did not move. Wave hit, hardware jammed, I had his glove, then I did not. People told me there was nothing I could have done. People love that sentence. They hand it to you like soup, but I keep thinking if I had checked the angle one more time, if I had been stronger, if I had not trusted the line. His voice stopped, not broke, stopped as if it had reached a cliff and refused to step. Caleb set a hand on the beam between them. Maybe you build gear because one line failed and you cannot go back to that water. Maybe. Then build it. But do not build it alone and call that honoring him. Dead men do not need monuments as much as living men need help. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment he was on the deck again, salt in his mouth, Mason's hymn shredded by wind. Then Atlas barked from the doorway, impatient with human sorrow that did not involve immediate action. Caleb smiled faintly. Dog says therapy hour is over. By morning, the crisis had become a system. Natalie had triaged every order. 5 could ship on time. 4 needed a 2-day delay with honest explanation. 3 required recutting. Grace called customers herself from the hardware store and reported that not one had canceled. One man asked if the straps came with authentic roof collapse seasoning. Ethan did not find that funny until the 3rd time he repeated it. Then he had to sit down. The lost material hurt, but less than he expected. What mattered most had survived the patterns, the test notebook, the sewing machine, the finished prototypes, the people, especially the people. He did not know what to do with that yet. 2 days later, Blake Harris walked into the warehouse. He wore his polished outdoor jacket and an expression that looked uncomfortable being carried by his face. The temporary tarp still snapped over the ruined shed. The place smelled of wet wood drying, leather, chili, and work. Heard about the roof, Blake said. Everyone heard about the roof. Small town. Loud roof, Blake looked at the racks, the drying station, the labeled bins. Natalie at the shipping table, Grace writing tags. Caleb tightening a clamp, Atlas asleep beside the stove, with one eye open. Whatever he had expected from Ray Walker's old warehouse, it was not this. I need 40 units, Blake said. Ethan wiped a line of chalk from his hand. Units of what? Drag straps, tool belts, and those utility harnesses for backcountry snowmobile kits. North Ridge wants to carry them. Grace stopped writing. Natalie looked up. Caleb's eyebrows rose so high they nearly escaped his hat. Ethan felt no triumph, only caution, and under it a small bright ember that might have been vindication if he allowed it air. Minimum order terms will be in writing, he said. Blake nodded. I figured. No exclusivity. We can discuss. We just did. Blake glanced at Grace, then back at Ethan. You do not make this easy. Easy breaks. Before Blake could answer, the phone rang. Natalie picked it up, listened, then covered the receiver with one hand. Ethan, she said, voice carefully level. It is a buyer from a hardware chain in Duluth. They read the article. They want to know if we can supply multiple stores by next winter. The warehouse went quiet except for the tarp snapping overhead and Atlas beginning to snore like a small engine. Ethan looked at the broken roof, the sorted straps, the people waiting, and the snow falling through a hole that had not managed to end them. Tell them, he said slowly, we need to see the numbers. Spring in Marquette arrived like a rumor nobody trusted. Snowbanks shrank at the edges, then froze again overnight, and Lake Superior stayed cold and iron-colored, watching the town with the patience of something ancient and unimpressed. The Duluth buyer's name was Karen Whitmore, and she did not waste words. She managed regional procurement for a 40-store hardware chain stretching across northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of Michigan. She had seen the Harlow rescue clip, read the local article, and called 3 people who had used Ethan's straps in real conditions. By the time she spoke with him directly, she knew his prices, his current production volume, his warranty language, and possibly his blood type. We are interested in 3 product lines, she said over speakerphone while Natalie took notes and Grace pretended not to listen from the packing table. Cold weather drag straps, reinforced work belts, and snowmobile rescue kits. Initial placement would be 8 stores, if sell-through meets target expansion to 24 stores by next winter. Ethan looked at the whiteboard. Natalie had written current monthly capacity in blue, potential Duluth demand in red. The red number looked like it had kicked the blue number down a flight of stairs. We cannot meet that volume today, Ethan said. Grace closed her eyes briefly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in restraint. Karen did not sound offended. Can you meet it in 6 months? Ethan looked at Natalie. Natalie looked at the repaired shed wall, the new racks, the single industrial sewing machine. The second machine they had bought used from a shuttered upholstery shop, and the stack of orders waiting for labels. With controlled product selection and a phased schedule, Natalie said, leaning toward the phone. Yes, but we would need purchase commitments early enough to hire and train before peak season. Karen paused. Who is speaking? Natalie Brooks, Operations. Ethan did not correct the title. Natalie noticed. Her pen stilled for half a second, then moved again. Good, Karen said. I prefer operations people. They worry honestly. After the call, Ethan walked outside and stood in the yard. The scrap pile was gone now, not because they had used it all, but because Natalie had forbidden piles. Material arrived, got weighed, tagged, graded, and stored. The yard looked less like a place where things were abandoned and more like a place where things were becoming something. That should have comforted him. It did not exactly. It made the future visible, and visibility had its own kind of cold. Atlas followed and sat in a patch of thin sun. Mud clung to his paws. He looked pleased with the season because mud offered new artistic possibilities. We cannot do 24 stores, Ethan said. Atlas looked toward the warehouse where Natalie was probably already building a production model. Do not side with her. The dog yawned. The next weeks became a lesson in scale, which was another word for discovering how many ways success could break your furniture. They hired 2 part-time stitchers, both women who had worked at Nagani Protective Systems. Before layoffs thinned the sewing floor, Paula Grant had hands quick as birds and no patience for vague instructions. Denise Harper brought her own thimble, her own lamp, and a thermos of tea she claimed had medicinal properties but smelled like a damp lawn. Ethan trained them the way he had trained himself, then realized that was useless. He carried too much in muscle memory. Paula would stop him mid-demonstration and say, "Why did you angle that stitch?" Denise would ask, "How tight is tight?" Ethan had to slow down, define measure document. Natalie filmed his hands. Grace wrote plain language instruction cards. Caleb tested samples from each trainee and took mean pleasure in pretending to be difficult quality control. "This seam is ugly," he said one morning, holding up a test piece. Paula stared at him. "That seam could pull your truck out of a ditch." "My truck avoids ditches out of respect. Your truck leaks oil in Grace's parking lot. That is how it signs the guest book." The warehouse changed. Workbenches lined the south wall. Patterns hung on pegboard. Finished products moved to a drying and inspection rack near the repaired shed. Shipping got its own corner, which Natalie defended from all stray tools with moral force. Atlas's bed was placed near the stove and marked with a small sign Liam made head of security. Atlas ate the corner of the sign, possibly to test its durability. Ethan worked longer hours than anyone, which impressed no one. "You cannot be the emergency plan for every station," Natalie told him. "I am not." "You repaired the cutter, recut Paula's batch, checked every buckle, answered Karen's email at midnight, and slept 20 minutes in a chair." That was not sleep. That was a tactical pause. That was a man losing an argument with upholstery foam. Grace, passing with a box, said, "I have seen the foam. It won." There was laughter. Ethan tried not to enjoy it too much. In May, they attended the Upper Lakes Rescue and Winter Safety Conference in Duluth. Ethan hated conferences on principle. They involved name tags, carpet, and conversations where people said synergy with a straight face. But Dana insisted the rescue community needed to see the gear. Karen arranged a small vendor table. And Grace said if he did not go, she would design the booth herself using glitter. That threat moved mountains. They drove west along roads still crusted with old snow in the ditches. The conference center smelled of coffee, wet coats, and industrial cleaner. Their booth was simple straps, belts, harnesses, material samples, test photos, and one looping video of the Harlow rescue. No heroic music, no dramatic slogans, just the moment when the sled slipped and the harness held. People stopped. A sheriff's deputy from Minnesota asked about cold cracking. A volunteer from Wisconsin asked if the drag straps floated. A woman who ran a snowmobile club bought 3 rescue kits after pulling the stitching close to her face and saying, "My father would have approved of this." Ethan learned that praise was easier to take when it was directed at the work and not at him. Then Owen Pierce appeared. He had no badge for the conference and wore his factory jacket zipped high. Ethan saw him standing across the aisle looking at the display, not mocking, calculating. "Did you follow us?" Grace asked under her breath. "That would be strange," Ethan said. "Men have done stranger things for less interesting reasons." Owen approached when the crowd thinned. He picked up a snowmobile rescue kit and turned it over. "You are charging $139 for this?" "Yes. Material in that kit cost you almost nothing." The material cost almost nothing. The inspection, design, labor training, testing, warranty, packaging, and customer trust did not. Grace looked down to hide a smile. Owen set the kit down. "Our management is asking questions about disposal savings, about value." There it was. The word had crossed the fence. "They saw the article," Owen continued. "They saw the conference listing. Someone asked why we are giving away material used in products retailing at these prices. Because you were paying to throw it away. That was before you created a market. I did not create the material." I recognized it. Owen's mouth tightened. "Temporary letter expires in June. Then we write a real agreement. Or we bid the material to recyclers." Grace's hand stilled on the table. Natalie, who had been explaining belt sizing to a customer, glanced over but kept talking. Ethan felt the old heat in his chest. He let it pass. Anger was easy. Math was better. Recyclers will pay by weight, he said. Low-rate, inconsistent pickup. No local story, no documented rescue use, no skilled jobs in Marquette tied to your waste reduction. I can show you the value of keeping the stream local. Can you pay a fair handling fee, maybe? Not raw material pricing. Management will want more than maybe. Then they can come to the warehouse and see what the material becomes. Owen looked surprised. You are inviting them. I am inviting the people making decisions to look at the consequences of those decisions. Owen gave a short laugh. You talk like that in meetings, Walker. Only when I am tired. You are always tired. Then I am consistent. The exchange left a bruise on the day. Ethan returned to the booth, answered questions, sold 3 more kits, and smiled badly in a photo Karen insisted on taking for the chain's internal newsletter. But the math had changed. Free leather and webbing had made the margins possible. A modest fee might be manageable. A bidding war would crush them before the Duluth contract matured. On the drive home, Natalie ran numbers in the passenger seat, while Grace napped in the back beside Atlas, who had claimed half her coat. Caleb had stayed in Marquette to supervise the shop and send threatening messages about the coffee supply. If material cost rises above 10% of revenue, we can survive, Natalie said. Above 18, we have to raise prices or cut product lines. Above 25, the Duluth expansion becomes dangerous. We do not cut quality. I did not suggest that. I know, she closed the notebook. You need to let the brand become more than rescued scrap. It is rescued scrap plus knowledge. The knowledge is the moat. He glanced at her. I read business books, she said. Do not look so wounded. Back in Marquette, rain fell on old snow, turning the yard into gray slush. Ethan walked into the warehouse and found Caleb at the workbench with Liam, showing the boy how to thread a strap through a buckle. Atlas trotted in, shook water everywhere, and restored the room to its proper level of chaos. On the bench lay a letter from Nagani Protective Systems. Formal notice. Temporary diversion arrangement to be reviewed. Future material access subject to renegotiation. Ethan read it twice. Natalie came in behind him and did not ask what it said. Grace looked from his face to the paper. Caleb removed his hat. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the shop phone rang. Natalie answered. Her face changed as she listened. Ethan, she said, covering the receiver. Karen from Duluth wants to move from 8 stores to 12 for the first placement. She says their district managers are asking for numbers by Friday. Ethan looked at the renegotiation letter, then at the wall where the first note still hung, factory trash stays trash. The room waited. Tell Karen, he said, Friday works. By June, the snow had retreated into the shaded places and the dirty ridges behind parking lots. But Marquette still carried winter in its bones. The lake stayed cold, the evening smelled of wet cedar and iron water, and in the warehouse, Superior Rescue Works moved as if the next blizzard were already on the calendar. The renegotiation letter lay under a magnet on Natalie's whiteboard. She had put it there where everyone could see it, which Ethan disliked for about a day before admitting she was right. Hidden threats grew teeth. Visible threats became tasks. Beneath the letter, she wrote 3 columns: material access, production capacity, pricing. You are enjoying this too much, Ethan told her. I am enjoying knowing where the danger is. That is not enjoyment. It is for operations people. Grace came in with a stack of wholesale order forms and a bag of muffins from the bakery. Operations people get muffins, brooding founders get whatever is left. I am not brooding. Paula, without looking up from the sewing machine, said, You brooded at a buckle yesterday. The buckle deserved it. The shop had grown into a rhythm. Material came in, got tagged, cut, stitched, inspected, packed. Ethan still checked every load-bearing seam himself, but not because no one else could. Paula and Denise were good. Natalie had built inspection forms so clear even Caleb used them without complaining, though he did add weather comments in the margins. Grace managed local retail and seemed to know every customer by name, boot size, and emotional weakness. Caleb trained volunteer teams and sent back notes written in pencil on index cards. Atlas supervised from his bed, rising only for visitors' lunch and moral emergencies. Blake Harris arrived on a Tuesday afternoon wearing less shine than usual. His first order had sold faster than he expected. That was how he said it. Faster than he expected, not faster than Ethan expected, though the difference lived in the room with them. "I want to reorder," Blake said. 60 units this time. Mixed. Also, the backcountry kits are getting attention from guides. Natalie handed him a printed wholesale sheet. "Updated terms." Blake's eyebrows lifted. 30% deposit for orders over 40 units, Natalie said. Net 30 after delivery. Yes. No regional exclusivity. Blake looked at Ethan. "That's your final position?" "It is our standard position." Grace turned away, smiling at the word "our." Blake tapped the paper. "You know I was hard on this at the community center." No one rescued him from the silence. It stretched just long enough to become useful. "I was wrong," he said finally. The words came out stiff like boots not yet broken in. "The gear is good. Customers trust the rescue story, but they come back because the straps hold. I should have judged the work instead of the source." Ethan studied him. Apologies were strange tools. Some were decorative, some were sharp, some were clumsy and still did the job. "Sign the terms," Ethan said, "and we can ship in 3 weeks." Blake looked relieved enough to be annoyed by it. "Fair." After he left, Grace leaned against the cutting table. "That was graceful by your standards. My standards are load-bearing. Your charm is in beta testing." Atlas groaned from his bed, a sound so perfectly timed that Paula nearly sewed through a scrap laughing. The Duluth proposal required a formal production plan. Ethan had never written one. Natalie had, or close enough. She built a binder with sections for product specifications, quality control, training, time supply, risk delivery schedule, warranty rates, and capacity limits. Ethan added test data until the binder looked like it might require its own forklift. Grace made him remove 17 pages. "Customers do not need to see every frozen strap you tortured," she said. "Karen is not a customer, she is procurement." "Procurement people are customers with sharper pencils." Karen visited in person 2 weeks later. She arrived in a navy coat, sensible boots, and a rental car that immediately got stuck in the mud near the old snow pile. Caleb pulled her out with one of Ethan's drag straps, which he called a live demonstration and Karen called effective use of embarrassment. She toured the warehouse with Natalie leading. Ethan watched from slightly behind an old habit and realized Natalie knew the shop as well as he did now. Maybe better. She explained incoming inspection material grades, batch tracking, stitch standards, load testing, packaging, and return handling. Paula and Denise demonstrated the difference between cosmetic irregularity and structural compromise. Grace showed retail displays and customer education cards. Caleb described field training with the solemnity of a man who had finally found a way to make his long guilt useful. Karen listened. She asked hard questions. Nobody flinched. At the end of the tour, she stood before the wall where Ethan had hung the first harness used at Harlow Lake. Beside it were the broken store-bought strap, the note saying, "Factory trash stays trash," and a framed photo of Atlas looking much more heroic than his personality justified. "Why keep the note?" Karen asked. Ethan crossed his arms. "Quality control." She glanced at him. "It reminds us what happens when people misname things." Karen nodded slowly. "I can offer 12 stores for the first placement, conservative quantities. If sell-through is strong and returns are low, We expand to 24 next season. I need delivery by October 15th. Natalie did not cheer. Ethan appreciated that. She simply wrote the date. We can meet that with a signed purchase order by July 1st, Natalie said. And deposit. Karen smiled. You trained her well. She trained us, Ethan said. Natalie kept writing, but her ears turned pink. That should have been the day's victory. Instead, Owen Pierce arrived an hour after Karen left, bringing 2 people from Nagani Protective Systems Management and a woman from finance named Marcia Lane, who inspected the warehouse with the careful skepticism of a person trained to find leaks in buckets. Ethan had invited them. He regretted that immediately and then regretted regretting it. If he wanted an agreement, they needed to see the system, not the romance, the system. He showed them the same flow Karen had seen, but with different numbers. Their disposal savings, sorting efficiencies, positive local press, jobs created, potential waste reduction reports, reduced landfill tonnage. He explained that if the factory priced the material like virgin inputs, Superior would not survive and the material would likely go back into low-value recycling or disposal. If they charged a fair handling fee and secured regular access, both businesses could claim a measurable win. Marcia asked for projections. Natalie gave them. One manager asked about liability. Ethan gave warranty language and inspection protocols. Owen said little until they reached the test rig. He watched as Paula loaded a sample strap to the marked threshold and held it there. The strap did not sing, stretch, or beg. It held. How much of this process depends on you personally? Marcia asked Ethan. That was the question, the one hiding under all the others. A year earlier, the answer would have been everything. He would have defended that as quality. It had been fear wearing a craftsman's apron. Less every month, he said. Critical design and final standards are mine. Batch inspection is documented. Sewing standards are trainable. Natalie manages operations. Field feedback comes through Caleb and rescue partners. Grace handles retail education. If I get hit by a snowplow tomorrow, the shop loses experience, not its memory. Grace's face changed at the snowplow part. Please select a less vivid hypothetical. Marcia made a note. Owen looked at Ethan with an expression that came close to respect and stopped one step short, perhaps out of habit. They left without agreement. That was expected. Still, the warehouse felt colder after the door closed. 3 days later, the offer came by email. Nigoni would provide sorted offcut streams for 12 months. In exchange, Superior would pay a handling fee per pound and agree not to represent the material as factory certified. The fee was higher than Ethan hoped and lower than he feared, manageable if they raised prices modestly and reduced waste further. Dangerous if Duluth delayed. Natalie ran the numbers until dark. Grace brought sandwiches. Caleb pretended to read a fishing magazine while listening to every word. Atlas lay beneath the table with his head on Ethan's boot. We can do it, Natalie said at last. But we need to raise retail prices 8% and wholesale 5%. No discounts for Blake. No custom oddities until after Duluth ships. We add small products from grade C material to recover value. People will complain, Grace said. People complain when snow is wet, Caleb said. Snow is often wet. Exactly. Ethan signed the Duluth purchase order the next morning, then sent a counter to Nagani 3-year term stole fee first right of refusal on defined grades joint waste reduction language, and review only after year 2. Natalie read it twice and nodded. Grace read it and fixed 3 commas which Ethan found unnecessary until she explained commas could cost money. Owen called it 5. 3 years is ambitious. So is throwing away value for a decade. Management will push back, then push better. Owen was quiet. You always this cheerful. Ask my dog. Atlas hearing dog lifted his head. We will meet Friday, Owen said. Final terms. Friday morning the sky turned black over Lake Superior, though the forecast had promised clear weather. Thunder rolled strange for June and rain came down cold and hard. Ethan stood at the warehouse door with the unsigned agreement in his hand, watching water run through the yard where snow had been. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Owen. Corporate received outside bid for scrap stream. Meeting delayed. Do not make commitments until further notice. Ethan read it once, then again. Inside, Natalie was taping Duluth delivery dates to the board. The rain turned the yard into a mirror of gray mud, and every truck that came through left tracks deep enough to hold the sky. Inside the warehouse, the Duluth schedule hung on the whiteboard in blue tape, while Owen's message sat on Ethan's phone like a stone. Corporate received outside bid for scrap stream. Meeting delayed. Do not make commitments until further notice. Ethan did not throw the phone. That counted as growth. He set it face down on the cutting table, walked to the back door, and stood there long enough for Atlas to leave his bed and press his shoulder against Ethan's knee. The dog did not whine. He did not perform comfort. He simply added weight where the man seemed to be losing balance. I know, Ethan said. Natalie read the message and went still in the way people go still when math in their head changes color. If we lose the stream, we can fill existing orders with current inventory and maybe one more month. Duluth becomes impossible unless we find another source. We find another source. In 6 weeks, we look. Grace was at the hardware store when Ethan called. She listened, then said, I will ask around. Ask who? Everyone. That is not a category. It is in Marquette. By noon, the search had spread. Grace called upholsterers, boat repair shops, a snowmobile seat manufacturer, 2 canvas awning companies, and a man who made custom dog sled gear, and answered the phone as if Alexander Graham Bell had personally insulted him. Caleb called volunteer contacts across the Upper Peninsula. Natalie built a spreadsheet of alternate inputs, costs, distances, usable grades, and whether any supplier sounded sane. Paula knew a retired supervisor from a textile plant near Green Bay. Denise had a cousin who worked in municipal procurement and claimed there were pallets of unused straps sitting in a county warehouse because someone ordered the wrong shade of orange. Ethan drove to 3 places in 2 days. He came back with samples, bad coffee, and a renewed respect for the specific quality of Nagani's waste. Most scrap was scrap because it had been abused, contaminated, or stored under the theory that raccoons, weather, and forklifts could become business partners. Nagani's offcuts were different, clean, traceable, consistent enough for a small manufacturer with strict inspection. Losing them would not kill the idea, but it would wound the system just when others were depending on it. That was the part that made sleep thin. On the 3rd night, Ethan found himself at the workbench after midnight taking apart the first harness again, though it did not need taking apart. He cut a stitch, then stopped, ashamed of the useless motion. Atlas lay nearby, watching. The warehouse smelled of oiled leather, damp wood, and rain through the open vent. He could hear Mason's voice in memory, not from the rescue this time, but from an ordinary night years earlier, when they had repaired gear under buzzing lights. You trust equipment after you inspect it, Mason had said. You trust people after you let them carry something. Ethan looked toward the office corner where Natalie's production binders stood in a straight row. He looked at Grace's retail display cards, Caleb's field notes, Paula's sample seams, Denise's neat stacks of cut leather. Everyone was carrying something. The fear had not vanished. It had changed jobs. Friday's delayed meeting became Monday, then Tuesday. Owen finally called and said corporate would hear both proposals. The outside bidder was a regional recycling broker offering a flat rate per pound for mixed industrial textile and leather waste. Simple, clean, no local complications, no need to sort, no small company asking for defined grades and 3-year terms. They will like simple, Owen said. Simple is not always profitable. It is often easier to approve. Then we make value easier to approve. Owen exhaled. You get 15 minutes. I need 30. You get 20. Ethan hung up and called a meeting in the warehouse. Not a dramatic one. No speech. He put the problem on the table and let the people who had become the company look at it. Natalie brought numbers. Grace brought customer letters. Caleb brought rescue testimonials, including one from Dana, stating that Superior's prototype harness had directly supported a successful Harlow Lake extraction under severe winter conditions. Paula and Denise brought defect rate charts from training batches. Karen from Duluth, when Grace called and asked, bluntly sent an email stating that her chain's purchase order depended on documented local material sourcing and quality control. Even Blake wrote a note, awkward but useful, saying customers chose the products because they combined durability, regional identity, and a story that made sense. Ethan read Blake's note twice. "Do not frame it," Grace said. "I was not going to. Your face considered it." And the meeting at Nagani took place in a conference room with no windows and a table polished enough to reflect everyone's doubts. Marcia Lane sat with 2 senior managers, Owen and a man from corporate sustainability who seemed surprised to find himself relevant. The recycling broker had presented before Ethan arrived. "A neat offer," Marcia said. "Reliable pickup, known pricing, minimal internal changes." Ethan set his binder on the table and did not open it immediately. "If this is only waste by weight, take their offer," he said. That got attention. "By weight I cannot beat a broker. I will not pretend otherwise. But your material is not only waste by weight, it is a local input stream that already created jobs, reduced landfill disposal, supported rescue teams, generated positive press, and opened a retail channel tied directly to your region. The broker will shred it. We will multiply it." He showed them the numbers, but he did not bury them. Disposal savings, handling fee revenue, projected tonnage diverted, job supported, Duluth purchase order, estimated annual revenue crossing $500,000 if the first placement succeeded. He showed the Harlow rescue clip not because he wanted drama, but because every product spreadsheet in the world should occasionally answer the question of what happens in the dark when something has to hold. When the sled slipped on screen, no one spoke. Then Grace's customer letters. A lineman who said the belt did not crack in freezing rain. A volunteer whose daughter now carried a Superior rescue strap in her snowmobile kit. An elderly farmer who used a drag strap to pull a feed sled and wrote that it was nice to own something made by people who understood winter. Caleb's testimony was short. He had written, "I have seen bad gear cost time. Time is life in snow." Marcia read that one twice. The sustainability man leaned forward. "Could this be reported as a waste reduction partnership?" "Yes," Natalie said from Ethan's left. She had come because Ethan asked. He was still proud of that. "With defined material categories, weights, and end product traceability. We can send quarterly reports. And the fee?" Marcia asked. Ethan slid the counterproposal across the table. "Stable handling fee. 3-year term, first right of refusal on defined material. You retain the right to send unusable streams elsewhere. We do not use your name in product marketing without written approval. Joint case study only if both sides agree." One manager frowned. 3 years is long for scrap. Owen, who had said almost nothing, finally spoke. "It is not scrap once they touch it." The room shifted, not much, enough. The managers did not sign that day. Managers rarely did in Ethan's limited and painful experience. They asked questions until the air turned stale. Natalie answered margin questions. Ethan answered quality questions. Grace, who had insisted on coming because she said somebody needed to make sure Ethan did not accidentally communicate entirely through jaw tension, explained customer education and retail demand. By the end, Marcia had written action items on a yellow pad, and the sustainability man had used the phrase regional circular economy twice, which made Grace stare at the ceiling for strength. Outside, Owen walked them to the parking lot. "You did well," he said. Ethan waited for the hook. Owen looked annoyed. "That was the whole sentence. I am adjusting. They may still ask for a higher fee. We can absorb a fair one, and if the broker raises their bid..." Ethan looked across the lot at the factory vents breathing into the summer air. "Then they choose whether they want a check or a story with checks attached." Owen shook his head. "You sound like Grace. Do not tell her. She will invoice me." For 2 weeks, nothing was final. Work continued because work did not wait for certainty. They cut, stitched, tested, packed. Duluth's first production batch began under a banner Liam made with marker and taped crookedly over the shipping area, 12 stores or bust. Natalie tried to remove it. Atlas sat in front of it. The sign stayed. Blake's second order shipped on time. Dana's rescue team approved the revised harness angle. Grace sold out of utility belts twice. Caleb began running Saturday safety sessions behind the warehouse where volunteers practiced with superior gear, and Ethan pretended not to watch from the doorway. Sometimes he joined. Sometimes he still could not. Progress he was learning did not always look like marching forward. Sometimes it looked like not leaving. The Negoni agreement arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Marcia had accepted most terms with a modestly higher handling fee and a review at 18 months. 3-year access remained. Defined grades remained. First right of refusal remained. Quarterly reports required. No use of factory name without approval. Signed by management pending Ethan's signature. Natalie read it. Grace read it. Caleb read the first page, declared the rest allergic to plain English, and waited for translation. "It works," Natalie said. "Tight, but it works." Ethan held the pen. His hand did not shake. That surprised him. "Before you sign," Grace said, "you should know something." Everyone looked at her. She took a breath. "Karen called me. Duluth wants to add a charitable winter safety bundle for rural volunteer teams. Discounted units co-sponsored by stores. It would not make much margin, but it would put the gear in places that need it most." Ethan looked at the agreement, the production board, the tired faces around him. The dog sleeping under the table with one paw over his nose. More work, less margin, more people depending on them. Fear rose, then it made room. "Build it into the schedule," he said. Natalie smiled. Caleb looked away fast. Grace's eyes shone. The first snow of the new season came early in a thin September veil that melted when it touched the road but stayed on the warehouse roof until noon. Marquette took the warning seriously. People who lived beside Superior knew winter did not need permission to enter. Ethan did not notice the snow at first. He was kneeling beside Atlas's bed with one hand under the dog's chest, counting breaths. The untouched dinner bowl sat like an accusation. Atlas had skipped meals before when offended by thunder antibiotics or the moral failure of kibble without gravy. This was different. His eyes were too quiet. His ears did not lift when a truck passed. When Ethan said his name, the tail moved once, not with opinion but effort. "We are going," Ethan said. At the word going, Atlas usually sprang up as if the entire world had been invented for travel. Now he tried, slipped, and lowered his head again. Ethan wrapped him in an old wool blanket and carried him to the truck. Atlas was heavy, warm, and frighteningly still. The last time Ethan had carried a teammate, cold water had taken the weight from his arms before help arrived. Memory came so fast he nearly stumbled on the threshold. Grace's car turned into the yard just then. She took one look and opened the passenger door without asking. "Vet," she said. "Yes, I will drive. I can drive. You can sit with him." He almost argued. Atlas made a small sound. Ethan climbed into the back seat. The veterinary clinic's emergency lights glowed yellow against the wet pavement. Dr. Laura Kenny met them at the side entrance, gray braid over one shoulder. Fleece jacket, half-zipped, sleep still creased at one cheek. She had treated half the working dogs in the county and spoke to animals in the brisk, respectful tone Ethan preferred from doctors of any species. "What happened?" "Lethargic, no food, weak standing, no vomiting that I saw. He worked around scrap yesterday, but nothing unusual." "Paw." Ethan blinked. "What?" "He's favoring the left front." He looked down. In the panic, he had missed it. Atlas's left front paw was tucked close. Dr. Kenny guided them inside, shaved a small patch between the pads, and found the wound. A narrow cut nearly hidden, inflamed beneath packed hair and grit. Infection had moved fast. "Not catastrophic," she said, serious enough to make him feverish. "Treatable. Treatable." The word entered Ethan slowly, like warmth returning to frozen fingers. He sat on the clinic floor beside Atlas while antibiotics and fluids began their work. Grace sat with him. She did not fill the room with comfort. She leaned against the cabinet, coat still on, and waited. "I thought," Ethan began, then stopped. "I know." "No, you do not." "No," she said softly, "but I know the shape of thinking you are about to lose the one creature who got you through the worst year of your life." He looked at her then. Really looked. Grace Miller, who fixed shelf tags, argued invoices, brought muffins, handled customers, and had a grief of her own. Folded behind her practical hands. Her husband had died 5 years earlier in a highway accident outside Munising. Ethan knew the fact. He had never asked about the weather of it. "I am sorry," he said. She nodded. "Me too." Atlas sighed under Ethan's hand, long and tired but alive. The fear did not vanish. It loosened. By morning, Dr. Kenny sent Atlas home with medication, a wrapped paw, strict rest instructions, and a warning that German shepherds were terrible patients because they considered healing a negotiation. She was correct. Within 2 hours, Atlas attempted to inspect the cutting table and was blocked by Liam, who had come with Natalie before school carrying a handmade sign that read "Security Chief on medical leave." Atlas looked betrayed. "Doctor's orders," Liam told him. Atlas sighed as if civilization had failed, while Ethan stayed home with the dog the first day the warehouse ran without him. That fact should have hurt his pride. Instead, it humbled him in a way that felt almost like relief. Natalie managed the Duluth batch. Paula corrected a stitching issue before inspection. Denise trained a new part-timer on utility pouches. Grace handled a customer who wanted a discount because one strap had a scar in the webbing. Caleb led the afternoon field test and sent Ethan a photo of the strap holding a weighted sled with the caption, "Look no brooding required." Ethan stared at that message for a long time. The company did not need him less. It needed him differently. 2 weeks later, Duluth's first order shipped. 12 stores, 48 work belts, 120 drag straps, 72 rescue kits, 24 discounted winter safety bundles for rural volunteer teams. Every unit inspected, tagged, boxed, and loaded before the carrier arrived. Natalie stood with her clipboard while the truck driver signed. Paula and Denise clapped. Grace took a photo. Caleb pretended there was something in his eye. Atlas, wearing a protective boot and a look of legal outrage, sat at the warehouse door beside Ethan. When the truck pulled away, Ethan expected some grand feeling. Victory, maybe. Instead, he felt tired, grateful, and hungry. "That is it," Paula said. "We make history and nobody brought cake." Grace lifted a box from behind the counter. "Some of us understand civilization." The cake said 12 stores in blue icing. Atlas was not allowed any which he treated as a second medical crisis. The first store reports came in October. Strong sales in Duluth, Ashland, Houghton, and Superior. Customers liked the story, but the return rate mattered more. Almost none. One belt exchanged for size, one drag strap returned because a customer had misunderstood length. No structural failures. Karen sent weekly numbers. Natalie put them on the board. Nobody cheered too loudly. They had learned that numbers were not fireworks. They were weather readings. Useful, serious, and occasionally beautiful. At the same time, Caleb returned to the Marquette Volunteer Rescue Team in an official training role. Dana made the announcement during a safety session behind the warehouse, with snow flurries drifting sideways and Atlas sulking because his paw boot made him walk like a prince insulted by gravel. "Caleb brings decades of field experience," Dana said. "And he brings honesty about what we owe each other before the storm arrives." Caleb cleared his throat. "I also bring bad knees." "That too." The volunteers laughed. Caleb did not look at Ethan, but Ethan knew. Some forgiveness was not a door flung open, it was a hinge oiled carefully over time. Blake Harris surprised them again near Thanksgiving. He hosted a winter safety night at Northridge Outfitters and invited Ethan to speak. Ethan refused. Grace accepted on his behalf. There were folding chairs, a coffee urn, a display of superior gear, and a crowd larger than Ethan expected. He stood near the front with Atlas beside him, protective boot gone at last, and talked for 12 minutes about inspecting straps, replacing worn gear, and never trusting a bargain more than the life attached to it. Then Blake stepped forward. "I want to say something," he said. "When Ethan first brought this work to the community, I called it a hobby. Worse, I treated it like a joke because the materials came from a waste stream. I was wrong. This gear has earned its place in this town, and so has the shop that makes it." The room was quiet. Ethan did not know where to put his hands. Blake turned to him. "I am sorry." There were many things Ethan could have said. He chose the one that fit. "Thank you." Afterward, an older woman bought 2 rescue kits for her grandsons and told Ethan she prayed every piece of gear would never be needed and would hold if it was. That stayed with him. Some prayers were built backward like that. "Lord, let this be useless, and if not, let it be strong." December brought real snow. Thick, clean, relentless. The warehouse windows glowed late into the afternoons, and the shop smelled of leather coffee pine wreaths. Grace hung without permission in machine oil. Revenue crossed the projection Natalie had once written in red and circled twice. If December held, Superior Rescue Works would pass $500,000 in annual sales before New Year's Eve. Ethan did not tell anyone when he calculated it the first time. Then he told Natalie. Natalie told Grace within 9 minutes. Grace told everyone by lunch because she said secrecy was unhealthy for morale and cake planning. They held the celebration on a Friday while snow fell so thick the yard disappeared. No speeches were planned. Speeches happened anyway. Karen sent flowers. Owen sent a formal note from Nagani acknowledging the partnership's first quarterly waste reduction report. Blake sent a store display photo. Dana sent a rescue team patch. Pastor Daniel prayed over the shop, not long, just enough to thank God for work that kept hands busy and neighbors safer. Ethan stood beside the first harness on the wall. Under it hung the note, "Factory trash stays trash." He had meant to take it down. He did not. Atlas pressed against his leg, healthy again, warm and solid. Grace came to stand beside Ethan after the prayer. "You did it." He looked around the room. Natalie laughing with Paula, Caleb pretending not to like cake, Liam showing Atlas a drawing of a snow sled strap, Denise arguing with Owen about proper seam inspection because Owen had been brave or foolish enough to attend, Pastor Daniel washing cups in the sink, Blake holding a plate with the humility of a man learning where to stand. "We did," Ethan said. Grace smiled. "That was almost emotionally fluent. I practice when no one is here. Keep practicing." Her hand brushed his not by accident. He did not pull away. Then Liam tugged Ethan's sleeve. The boy held up a folded sheet of paper covered in pencil lines. "Mr. Walker, I made an idea. It is for old people who have to pull firewood sleds, but safer. It has a handle here and a strap here, and Atlas can test it when his mom says it is okay." Atlas's ears rose at his name, though he had no intention of pulling firewood for anyone. Ethan took the paper. The drawing was crooked earnest and better than he expected. He thought of a truck in snow, a pile of discarded material. Mason's voice, Caleb's rope. Grace's key, Natalie's labels, Atlas's stubborn nose under a coil of black webbing. He looked at Liam and felt the future enter the room without asking permission. "Show me the numbers," Ethan said. Christmas week settled over Marquette in deep snow, the kind that softened roofs, hushed roads, and made the harbor lights look like small candles set before a dark altar. Lake Superior breathed cold into the town, and the warehouse of Superior Rescue Works glowed warm behind frosted windows. Ethan arrived before dawn as he usually did. But he no longer arrived to prove he could outwork the ghosts. He arrived because the shop was quiet then, and quiet had changed its meaning. It was no longer emptiness. It was a room waiting for people he trusted. Atlas trotted ahead of him through the plowed path, fully recovered paw. Strong again, head high, sable coat dusted with snow. He paused at the door and looked back, impatient with locks, healing, and all human delays. "I am coming," Ethan said. Inside, the first harness hung on the wall where everyone could see it. The stitching was uneven near the left shoulder. The leather pad had a color mismatch. The webbing carried an old abrasion mark from Harlow Lake. Beside it hung Mason Cole's photograph, small and plain, showing a grinning man in a faded ball cap with one arm thrown around a younger Ethan, who did not yet know how much grief a life could hold. Under the photo was a brass tag Caleb had made for the ones the line brings home. Ethan had stood before that wall many times. In the beginning it hurt like touching a bruise. Now it hurt differently. Cleanly, the kind of hurt that could stand in the light. Natalie came in at 7 with Liam half asleep behind her, and a tray of cinnamon rolls balanced on one hand. "Do not judge me," she said. "Breakfast was a casualty." "I was not judging. Your eyebrow was warming up." Liam set his backpack near the office and went straight to Atlas, who accepted morning worship with the patience of royalty. The boy's sled strap drawing had become a shop joke, then a shop experiment, then a small prototype hanging over Ethan's bench. Not because it would become a major product, maybe it would. Maybe it would not, because someone young had looked at winter-old people firewood and leftover webbing and had seen usefulness. That mattered. By mid-morning, the warehouse filled. Paula and Denise finished the last batch of holiday rescue kits. Caleb arrived with a box of old photographs from Ray's Things, claiming he had found them while looking for a wrench, though nobody believed he had been looking for anything but an excuse. Grace came from the hardware store wearing a red scarf, cheeks bright from the cold, carrying paperwork and a cake she insisted was not for any occasion. "It says 500,000 on it," Ethan said when she set it on the packing table. "That is a weather report." On cake, people absorb numbers better with frosting. The official total had come the night before. $507,000 in annual revenue. Not profit, Natalie reminded them, because operations people believed joy should arrive with footnotes. Still, the number stood. It represented straps that held belts that did not crack rescue kits in rural trucks, wages paid waste. Diverted customers returning, and a factory that had finally learned the difference between disposal and partnership. Owen Pierce arrived just before lunch with Marcia Lane and 2 boxes of sorted sample material from a new production line. He looked uncomfortable around celebration, which made him more relatable to Ethan than either man would admit. "We are testing a new fire-resistant fabric," Owen said. "Offcuts will be cleaner if the contract goes through. Management wants to know if Superior can evaluate potential secondary uses before we classify waste." Natalie's pen appeared as if summoned by profit. "You want us involved before the material becomes scrap?" she asked. Owen glanced at Ethan. "Apparently that is what smart companies do," Grace whispered. "Frame that sentence." Ethan did not smile, but it was close. They cut the cake at noon. Pastor Daniel said grace, thanking God for work protection, second chances, stubborn dogs, and neighbors who arrived before being asked. Atlas barked once during Amen, which everyone accepted as participation. Snow pressed against the windows. The old stove ticked. Someone put on a radio station playing Christmas hymns. Caleb sang 2 lines in a voice that wandered bravely away from the melody and never returned. After the meal, Ethan stepped outside for air. The yard was white and clean, the plowed banks rising along the drive. He could see where the first truck had dumped the load nearly a year earlier, though no mark remained. Snow had covered it then, too. Snow covered many things. It did not erase them. It only waited to see what would be dug out. Grace came to stand beside him. "Too many people?" she asked. "No." That sounded honest. It was. She tucked her gloved hands into her coat pockets. "Ray would have loved this. He would have complained about the price of thread. That too." For a while they watched snow fall. Ethan did not feel the need to fill the silence. Grace did not either. Their hands touched, then stayed touching glove against glove, simple as a strap pulled through a buckle. "I am not easy," Ethan said. "I run a hardware store in Marquette," Grace said. "I do not shop in the easy aisle." He laughed, then quietly, and the sound startled him less than it once would have. Inside, Liam was showing Owen the sled strap prototype with the confidence of a child who had not yet learned that adults often needed permission to believe. Owen listened seriously. Natalie watched the boy smiling with a kind of tired wonder. Caleb stood near the wall with Mason's photo cap in hand, lips moving silently. Maybe a prayer, maybe an apology, maybe both. Atlas lay beneath the first harness, eyes half closed, as if guarding not the equipment but the proof that broken things could become useful without pretending they had never been broken. In January, the partnership with Negaoni expanded to include pre-sorting at the factory. In February, Duluth added 8 more stores. In March, Dinah's rescue team used a Superior harness during a night extraction near a frozen creek. And the report came back with 1 sentence. Ethan read 3 times. Equipment performed without issue. In April, Natalie became full partner in operations, a title Grace insisted should come with an office and Natalie insisted should come with better software. Paula began training new stitchers. Denise created a quality checklist so stern that Caleb said it made him want to confess things he had not done. Ethan still woke some nights at 3:17. Healing did not erase every alarm, but when he woke, Atlas was there breathing steady beside the bed. Sometimes Ethan would sit in the dark and listen to the house, the wind, the far hum of a plow, and he would let the present prove itself. The line had failed once. Not every line would fail. A man could inspect, repair, ask for help, and tie in again. Late that spring, the snow melted from the last shaded berm behind the warehouse. Beneath it, Atlas found a strip of black webbing, half frozen into the mud, missed from that first dumped load. He carried it inside like treasure and dropped it at Ethan's feet during a meeting with Owen, Karen, Grace, Natalie, and a consultant from a regional emergency services group. Everyone stopped. The strip was dirty, bent, and streaked with faded dye. Ethan picked it up and laughed under his breath. "Quality control?" Karen asked. "Origin story," Grace said. Ethan cleaned the strip, checked it, and hung it below the first note. "Factory trash stays trash." The words no longer sounded like a threat. They sounded like a mistake that had been allowed to remain on the wall long enough to become a warning against blindness. That afternoon, Liam brought in a revised sled strap design. This time he had added measurements, estimated material lengths, and a small chart labeled "Old People Would Help," which Natalie tactfully renamed "Senior Firewood Assist Concept." Ethan examined the drawing with the same seriousness he gave any proposal. "What do you think?" Liam asked. Ethan looked at the boy, at Natalie standing behind him, at Grace near the door with snowmelt on her boots, at Caleb pretending not to listen, at Atlas sitting upright as if he had personally funded the research. He thought of waste storms, stubborn mercy, and the strange ways God placed raw material into human hands. "I think," Ethan said, "we test it." They did. It held. And years later, when people told the story of superior rescue work, some began with the Harlow Lake Rescue, some with the Duluth contract, and some with the old Navy SEAL and the German Shepherd who could smell value under snow. Ethan preferred the simpler beginning. A truck came through a storm and dumped what others did not want beside a warehouse. A man stood there with a dog, a scar, and a grief he had mistaken for the end of usefulness. Then he picked up a strap. That was all. That was everything. Because sometimes the Lord does not send the answer polished. Sometimes he sends it cold, crooked, half-buried, and covered in factory dust. Sometimes he sends a loyal dog to pull it into the light. Sometimes he sends neighbors with coffee numbers, cake, and keys they kept for reasons nobody questioned soon enough. And sometimes, if a man is willing to look past the label someone else wrote, he discovers that the thing called waste was waiting to become rescue. The lesson of Ethan and Atlas is simple enough to carry into any ordinary day. Do not be too quick to throw away what looks broken, and do not be too quick to throw away the wounded places inside yourself. God often works through small materials, tired hands, loyal friends, and second chances that arrive, without looking like blessings at first. A scrap pile can become rescue gear. A lonely warehouse can become a community. A man who thought he was finished can become useful again. If this story touched your heart, comment "Amen" and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and love. May God bless you, protect your family, strengthen your hands for good work, and help you see the hidden value He places right in front of you.